Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do generally try to stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded as a YouTube video under the channel of Zenitsu, on top of being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. Please feel free to do all of the social media doobly-doos, leaving that like, rating, follow, subscribe, review, whatever, depending on the platform that you're listening on. It really does help support the podcast. Today, I am back with Jay Stewart, and we are going to be talking about colors. Just because colors is something that is seeming to kind of just fade away. It's not like gone, but it's meaning less now more than ever. And I think like the compounding issues to where the game currently is only promotes certain colors to actually be like being good. I know not everything can be fair and balanced. That's a very challenging task, but I think like right now things are getting to be a little bit on the polarizing end of the spectrum more than they have in the past. But on the topic of colors, the question of the week is going to be, what is your favorite color to play? So anyone that is a viewer or listener, feel free to type in the chat or the comments on your answer to that question. But Jay Stewart, what is your favorite color to play?
So one of my favorite colors to probably play is black. Black wasn't necessarily the first color that I started playing, so to say. I was starting off with purple and everything, but I have always found myself to be more of a defensive kind of anti-meta, like trying to stop you from doing what you want to do kind of thing, like a little bit from Yu-Gi-Oh. And I always thought black was like one of the best things because, like, you had the blocker that would stop your opponent from trying to swing at you. Always like having that kind of an extra shield, so to say, or security check they would have to try to go through. But also like, trying to remember what his name is. What's that Black Royal Knight from BT?
Craniumon?
Great. Yeah, Crayon one. The one in BT2. Like, I also liked how his effect was too, because his effect was any Digimon with blocker just can't be deleted. So it was like nice to have like that kind of protection that it also had too. And I've like literally people in my locals will even say I'm not being aggressive enough. It's like just something I've always kind of been. Like I wouldn't say I've always been an aggressive person. So a lot of the other colors aren't like my vibe. Plus, it doesn't help that Alphamon's also black, so gotta lean that way.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean, and I also kind of get where your play group is coming from, because I am in the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where I am usually a very aggressive player, because I know in particular card games, Digimon included, being aggressive usually is how you're actually going to be winning the game, and being able to win the game more consistently, because that's kind of like right now. Where green kind of is, where it's got a lot of good stuff going for it, but right now it's actually kind of a weird defensive color, and it's just having a hard time closing out games, which is why it's not doing well in competitive, like in the competitive side of things, just as a little bit of a prelude into like our overall breakdowns of the colors, and like why certain colors are doing better, and that's kind of why I naturally have always gravitated to blue. Gurumon's always been one of my favorite Digimon, so that is part of it. But the fact that blue is one of the more aggressive colors and has always been one of the most aggressive colors in Digimon is the big draw for me to do it and play that type of a color, because I could just spit out a whole bunch of guys, draw lots of cards, deal lots of damage, and the game's magically over at times. And I like how like quick paced games can be. But blue is definitely in a lot of hot waters right now, considering like where the current state of the game is and what decks are currently topping, because I don't know if anyone's taking a look at the competitive scene right now, but only two colors are viable. We do have some metadata to go over, but realistically, like I'll go over some of it and kind of show you that the majority of the colors that are being played are basically two colors, with maybe a third being able to squeak in just barely. So the first event that we're going to be looking at is going to be the TAC event. So this is the oh, that's Psycho Turtles. My bad. We'll get into Psycho Turtles later. So the TAC event is going to be the bigger event. And it was an Ultimate Cup. So keep that in mind. There we go. So this was 9 rounds, just shy of 100 players, or not 9 rounds, 7 rounds, just shy of 100 players. And as far as the top 16 archetype breakdown, we have 4 purple hybrids, 3 ancient Greymons, 2 Mirages, 2 Levias, 2 Fens, 2 Beelstars, 1 Imperial, 1 Lord Nightmon X, and 1 Emperor Greymon. So if anyone actually like stops and takes a look at the color breakdown, we have purple, red, blue, purple, 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 blue, purple, red. So, granted, the Ancient Greymon and Ancient and Emperor Greymon are kind of doing similar-esque things. So there is that where they're kind of occupying almost the same exact space. But regardless, the majority of the meta is blue and purple. And coming off of last meta, like the EX7 environment, because I actually do have some of that information. If anyone's wondering the top decks for last format, it was like the top 8 decks of last format were 50% blue and 50% purple. There was really no room for any other colors to exist. Other colors did exist, but when you actually like look at what's topping the most consistently and like recurringly, it's always been purple or blue. And that's kind of been the name of the game for a long time, but it hasn't been this exacerbated in quite a while because you always usually have some other like mechanics that some other colors are doing to be able to try to counterbalance it. But now that 2 color cards are being more prevalent, colors are like being shared, or mechanics are being shared across colors because of those 2 color cards, you're kind of seeing like this dilution in color identity per se. Like these mechanics are still tied to these colors, but part of the dilution is what's allowing these 2 colors more specifically to overperform because they already were overperforming. But if anyone's actually curious on what won the TAC event, it was Fen. Just big dumb OTK deck that just tries to set up a combo and win as quickly and efficiently as it possibly can, because that's what purple does. The second place deck was Mirage, and it does the exact same thing as Fen. Line up a big OTK combo. And then a lot of these decks are basically like Hyper Blitz aggro style, where they're just trying to end the game as quickly as they possibly can, which is why the resurgence of Ancient Greymon is kind of coming back, is because the new hybrid tools that we got in BT18 that's in Special Booster 2.0 allows red to be a lot more aggressive for no additional cost. And that's like the big takeaway on why red is starting to pop up, is because if a lot of these decks are just setup decks, red actually is a deck that can put pressure on those setup decks. And that's kind of why Purple Hybrids is also kind of doing well, is because it's being another hyper-aggressive deck, putting a lot of pressure on it. Either that, or as you can see, there's a Beelstar, but the Beelstar is not actually a Beelstar. It's Purple Hybrids in disguise. And that's taking the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like, oh, if I'm not going to be this Hyper Blitz aggro deck, I'm just going to be this hyper-defensive control deck. And Beelstar is just right now one of the better ones, because it can take advantage of the Purple Hybrid engine to not only close out games, but to have an alternate win condition, fuel its own stuff, and still have room for other things to exist. I think we took a look at it last week, so I'm not really going to be covering that, but I will pop up a Ancient Greymon deck. And if anyone's actually curious, the big card that's putting the deck over the edge is actually Gigasmon from BT18, because it has a on-play ability and when Digivolving ability to give one of your Digimon Rush. So the whole combo and idea is you're going to use Ancient Greymon from BT4. I know, such an old card. you're going to use that card more specifically in combination with the promo to be able to check the opponent's security pretty hard, pretty quickly. And you also have extenders like the BT 17 Burning Greymon and Agunimon to not only go on top of the promo Agunimon and do the whole combo that way, but you also can do it off of your tamers. So you have like this flexibility on how you can aggress and where you can aggress. And then the fact that the BT41 spits out a level 4 hybrid, it means that you could use Gigasmon to swing for game when your Digimon gets deleted, which is why gaining memory is like super important. So analog youth is definitely really good for being able to keep the memory count as efficient as possible when your Digimon ends up dying, because both of the ancients kill themselves. But yeah, just big dumb Hyper Blitz aggro. That's pretty much the majority of these decks in a nutshell. Is either Hyper Control or Hyper Aggro. The majority of them are in the aggressive side of things. So feel free to check out eggmanevents.com if you want like to actually look at the deck lists more specifically and see the full breakdown. I am curious on what the Emperor deck is doing. So the Emperor deck is actually just trying to play into the core strength of the BT18 Emperor. So it's cool that, you know, this is also allowed to exist, mostly because Red has some really good floodgates, I'm guessing, because they're running Gatsu and Shaman. And then just, you know, the new stuff, which is actually surprising, to be honest. But this is a smaller event compared to other larger North American events that we're used to. There's a big difference in player pool when it's 100 versus 300. And then the other event that I kind of want to touch on that I accidentally brought up earlier was the Psycho Turtles event. So this was one of the bigger store regionals because for whatever reason, Bandai has big store regionals and small store regionals. I participated in a small store regional at the beginning of the season, and this is one of the larger ones. So this was a 64-player event, full 6 rounds. Mine was 32, and it was 5 rounds. So there, again, big difference in what's actually able to succeed based on the size of the environment. Smaller events and environments let more roguish decks exist. That's just straight up fact because there's less competition for them to actually fight through. So if anyone's wondering, first place was a Fen deck again. A shocker, right? One of the better decks actually winning the event. Second place was a little bit more surprising with blue hybrids. This is actually like Tommy hybrids. So it's just utilizing the Kuma package because Kuma basically got to use Tommy twice because he actually is sharing colors with his old version versus a lot of the new tamers and hybrids not sharing colors with their old versions. I don't know why they decided to do that, but the fact that Tommy does means that he could actually be more viable as a standalone deck. I don't necessarily think that this deck is like insanely hyper competitive. I wouldn't recommend taking it to like a 300 plus man event, or 300 plus person event. But it's cool to see like stuff like this kind of exist, just because that's where the fun of the game is, even if the majority of the meta is still kind of just the same stuff. But as far as the archetype breakdowns, we had 4 purple hybrids. I know, shocker, a good deck doing well. 2 Mirages, 2 Imperials, 1 Fen, 1 blue hybrids, which is Tommy, 1 Ancient Grey, 1 Lord Mime X, 1 D Brigade, 1 Beelstar, 1 Bloom Lord, and 1 Galacti. So the majority of these decks we kind of already touched on. I already just looked at blue hybrids for a hot second. Galactimon did get some new stuff in this set, and they're also splashing in some Shadow Seraphimon because it's just a good card. So it's cool to see like this could still kind of exist in a manner. I think like literally if this isn't checked by blue, it actually could be a pretty good deck and pretty threatening deck. It's just, again, this is where color breakdown and what each of the colors are doing mechanically for where the current state of the game is. Like a deck like Galactimon in a big event probably wouldn't do very well because it has a higher chance of seeing blue decks that can out it, because Galactimon's biggest like weakness is source stripping, and almost every good blue deck source strips. So no wonder why we haven't really seen a lot of this before, and that's like the same sentiment for a lot of the game, is like certain mechanics just invalidate complete decks and archetypes as a whole, based on how decks are functioning. And I get that's like part of the meta dynamic and everything, but it's at a speed threshold and point that makes it very, very difficult for a lot of decks to even think about competing. And I think like that's my big overall like takeaway. So again, feel free to check out Eggman events if you want to see all of the breakdowns of everything there. So that's for the most part the meta in a nutshell. I was calculating and prepping my end of EX7 meta report, and I decided that I wanted to go the extra mile for this one because there's a lot of topics being thrown out right now on like Facebook and Reddit and whatnot about the current state of the game that I feel like is very important, like, to actually touch on, because a lot of people are dancing around the problems that the game is having. And part of it is going into the color identities of the deck, or like the color identities of the game. So I'm going to bring up two memes really quickly. I know they're not necessarily trying to be mean-spirited. I'm not like gonna put anyone on blast for like supporting the wanting to support the game in a more positive manner, because these were just made out of jest. So one of them is literally just blue decks printing memory and purple decks printing memory, and that's literally just the joke. Because that's literally what the game has devolved into right now, is blue and purple are just they're able to print the most memory and cheat on the game mechanically as much as possible, more than any other color in the entire game. And that's causing big issues on not allowing other colors and therefore other decks to be competitively viable. And I think like we're skirting on an issue, because there's another meme that the same person did where it's just like the predictions of Nationals finals, Mirage Galaxy versus Mirage Galaxy. Again, two blue decks just beating each other up because they print memory and OTK and are as uninteractive as possible. I think like these are just skirting around the issues. Because a lot of people are saying like the game's in a great state because of diversity. Like, oh, the meta is so diverse. We have 10 decks. But there's some statistics that I wanted to kind of share before we actually like get into the color topic. So I was doing some math, and because again I was prepping for my end of EX7 meta video, and I came to want to calculate the percentage of rogue decks that were legal, like not legal, that were able to be represented in a couple of the different formats. So I have them dating back all the way to BT14. So if anyone is wondering, BT14, Mirage was the pack leader of that format. He was a total of 16% overall representation of that meta. Granted, that meta was a smaller meta with only 5 events, and we had 24 total different decks represent. But of those 24 different decks through those 5 events, with Mirage being the best one, we still had a rogue meta percentage of 28%. That's pretty decent. BT15 was arguably one of the best formats. Still defend that it's one of the best formats. Post ban and restrictions, obviously. And we had Numemon as the pack leader by 17%. Not that bad. We had 20 different events being recorded. And of those 20 events, we had 33 different decks, and the rogue percentage was 24%. That's pretty good. BT16, we had a rogue meta percentage of 25% for the 24 different decks that were appearing from the 12 events recorded, with Numemon again being the pack leader, this time because of the power spike of BT16 by 32%, which carries into EX6, which has Numemon's pack leading percent, like the total pie that he's eating up, is 31% out of 13 events. And now we're starting to see, as of EX6, it shrink dramatically from 25% Rogue being viable to now a 14% chance of Rogue being viable. Then we look at BT 17, and the pack leader was Imperial by 24%. 18 different decks were able to top. Again, this was another smaller event pool, having only 5 events, and the Rogue percent was 18%. So a little bit of an uptick, but not as big as what we used to have literally before BT like 16 EX6. Because BT 16 we were still kind of figuring things out, and the meta was still kind of shaping, and then EX6 really was just BT 16 Part 2, and that was the solidification of it, which is where we currently are coming off of, which is the solidification of BT 17's meta, which out of the how many different events we had? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we had 12 events, 23 different decks top, but the Rogue percent chance is only 9%. So we have literally started seeing a decrease in what Rogue decks, like just the fact that Rogue decks can exist, go down almost every single subsequent set by at least 10%. So that's crazy to think. And if anyone's actually wondering what the BT7, like literally the top 8 decks for BT17 difference is compared to where we're currently coming off of EX7, it's almost identical. Like the top 8 between those two formats is literally identical. So between the Rogue percent going down and decks, like literally we're only playing the same decks, nothing's really being added or changed or shaken up. That's kind of alarming. Like that should be alarming. And again, this kind of boils down to the mechanics of what each of the colors are doing and where the current state of the game is for the top decks. So right now, as I kind of already said and spoiled, blue and purple are the 2 top colors of this format. Jay Stewart, why would you think, outside of the obvious on them printing memory, like both colors printing memory and having high levels of consistency, what other reasons would you think that those 2 colors are doing the best?
Yeah, so if I'm gonna take, for example, blue, for example, they have one of the blue's other identities is bouncing cards to hand and also deck bottom deck and stuff. You can even argue the source stripping. There's not as many counters to that versus preventing something getting deleted, like red likes to do, and everything. And there is some other colors like Chaos Degrade, for example, that can send cards to the top or bottom of security, for example, that could do that. Or the Hunter's deck that could tuck Digimon under another tamer or under one of their tamers or other Digimon, for example. But there's not really as often of a counter for the bouncing mechanic. There is a counter, yes, but it's not as commonly seen. And if there is, like take for example Magnamon X or even Tyrant Kabuterimon, like there's limits to it for how they could be countered. So to say, like, the Magnamon X, you have to get a card removed from security, and the Tyrant Kabuterimon, it has to be a Digimon's effect. But there's not as often of counters for those. As far as purple, I mean, the purple side is like, I can't think of anything other than it just really is the consistency, because I would almost argue purple has a better consistency than the blue does, because blue you have to draw into the cards, but you can almost guarantee set up what cards you need in your trash and just pull them at any moment you need in purple kind of situation.
Yeah, I think it's more so the fact that purple can actually utilize the aspects of other colors better than the actual colors themselves is partially why I feel like purple is excelling as a color overall, on top of the already stated obvious. But you mentioned that you went to locals and you started playing in the 2.0 environment. If you want, you could feel free to share your experience with that, like your actual
Yes,
experience with locals.
yeah. So we only had 3 rounds in our locals. Decided I wanted to bring Lucamon X because, like I said, I kind of been hyping it up a little bit, and I'm still missing cards for other things that I want to play. But Lucamon was the one I had built, and for that, my very first round was against Dom. He's like one of our top players and everything, like the one that goes to regionals that I think I've mentioned before. And he was playing a purple hybrid, and it was kind of my own fault. I didn't realize I wasn't paying close enough attention of how he was milling my cards because he started milling my cards. I'm like, oh, that's great. That sets up my trash perfectly for what I need to do in my Lucamon that's also purple and everything. But then it came to the point where he started changing my colors, and I'm like, oh, well, I really don't care because I'm evoing on top of name Pacific Digimon, or, oh, it's a tamer. I don't use tamers to evo on top of. But it wasn't until he started milling, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's how you're doing the milling. I kind of lost that, but the fact that I was constantly recovering and stopping him from doing all his, like, making all those early checks kind of pointless, I guess, so to say, or not as useful, kind of didn't help for him. I was starting to get him, but I just barely missed it. And then our round 2 was against a Machine Dramon deck. And because I'm playing the Lucamon deck, I'm giving him a lot of memory that he kind of needs to just go off. And the fact that he had, I think at one point during the round 3 or our third match, he had like 4 analogs man set up and everything. It was like, oh well, there's no way I could try to finish you off right now. And the last round was against a Lucamon, or not Lucamon, I'm sorry, a Lord Nymon deck, but using the somewhat of the Dark Knight engine. I can't really say it was complete Dark Nightmon. It was like some of the black base, like Male Dramon kind of stuff, the Galademon kind
Yeah, it
of
was
other
more
stuff mixed
night.
in.
It was more just Nightmon rather than Dark Nightmon, like Black Nightmon.
Yeah, yeah, he had Dark Knights, it's just more Nightmons, if anything. I mean, that one I won against, but I mean, I just didn't. At that point, I was already had lost 2 other matches, so it kind of just didn't make it worth the win, I guess, so to say.
Yeah. And like Lucamon is a very like Lucamon is one of the more skill intensive decks because the opponent like it's also a skill check on the opponent because if they choose the wrong cards to prioritize with Lucamon's abilities, like they could very easily put themselves in a no-win situation, which is like the core strength of the deck. But giving the opponent the option is partially on top of like giving them a lot of memory is partially why Lucamon isn't performing as well as we all would have liked and hoped to expect. Even though Lucamon is a purple deck, it's just again the efficiency of what it's doing versus the actual other good purple decks is like borderline night and day because you look at Lord Nightmon utilizing the dog package and for literally the cost of 1 memory, they could go with like 1 or 2 cards set up, which they could very easily do on their first or second turn. They could go all the way up into Lord Nightmon and then start beating the opponent's face in, taking out 4 security in a single go, if not more security in a single go, and then putting the opponent in a no-win situation because they can't deal with everything that Lord Knight A just played out for free, and B, the pressure that it's exuding because a lot of decks sometimes actually do need to have specific security counts. And doing it that early could really disrupt some of those decks. That's why like Bees isn't very good right now either, is because like the level of aggression is just so high that Bees can't stop them. And Bees want as many cards in their security as possible because they have effects that trigger from security because it deals with face-up security and whatnot. So like you can see that they're trying, like Digimon is trying to come up with new and interesting mechanics. It's just they're being completely invalidated because of the current pacing of the game being so out of whack just because a few cards with a few engines in combination with each other are outpacing and outtempoing the entire rest of the game. Or either that or they are forced to play like Mother Shoto style of control where they're now actively trying to slow down the game as much as possible by having this big uninteractive element for the most part. Um, but we could see like the last format, red was basically dead in the water because of the level of protection that a lot of cards had. So it's just like, oh, this Digimon can't be deleted by effects, or this Digimon has an on delete effect, and you don't want to trigger its on delete effect. Well, both of those situations make it so deleting Digimon is either A, impossible, or B, bad. And one of Red's big core mechanics that it works with is deleting Digimon. Whether it's attacking into them or whether that's by effect, most of the time it's by effect. But that's why they get like mechanics like Raid to be able to try to use the fact that they also like to have high DP numbers to ensure that they're going to hit over the opponent's Digimon. And that was like the core identity of Red, and Red literally has not even shifted from that identity outside of the inclusion of the Raid mechanic. Because Blitz is just Blitz. It just allows you to be more aggressive at the end of your turn, which we're seeing more style of like more of those style effects. So that way it doesn't feel bad to digivolve past turn and then do nothing with your Digimon. So like even just that type of a mechanic is trying to help accelerate Red, and they're trying to utilize that a little bit more in their favor. So that way Red could actually be more viable of a color. Which is why Red Hybrids is doing so well, is because the other big aspect to Red is punching really hard. Punching really hard is really good, but the unfortunate thing is every color can, well, almost every color can or does have something that allows them to punch really, really hard. We've seen this before with like, just random inherence of security attack plus on multi-attacking Digimon. Now you're able to out-damage Red because Red generally doesn't have the ability to unsuspend. Sure, you could add in an extra security attack, but a security attack plus an unsuspend is more damage than 2 instances of security attack. So like for the same level of input, your output is now weaker and slower than what other colors are doing. So other colors are literally doing the same thing that you're doing, but better now. And that's currently where like blue, black, and purple are kind of coming into play. And that's why Lord Knight is like such a menace of a card, is because it's basically a red card, but it has all of the benefits of both black and purple. So like that's kind of why I think like purple utilizing other colors on top of itself is what's allowing purple to be insanely strong, on top of the fact that it just already mechanically is so rich because of the speed in which it's able to set up, and the fact that the trash is very hard to interact with. So a lot of things that they're doing are very safe, like very safe. And then green.
Yeah. Plus, all
Yeah, go ahead.
well, also a little comment too about your thing with about red. Yeah, they can have more extra security, but the unsuspending's a little bit more powerful. Not even just the fact that you could swing another chance into the security, but you could also swing into suspended Digimon, so therefore giving you ways to check their security while also removing the board at the same time.
Yeah, it gives you more flexible options, because if you're literally going for like inherent effects by inherent effect, it's just like, okay, you both could have security attack +1. Like, so if blue has unsuspend, because that was the whole blue gimmick, was unsuspending at the beginning, and source stripping, but we'll get into those later. But like, if blue is literally there to unsuspend more than use security attack plus, that's the like equalizing mechanic, because one, unsuspend allows your Digimon to swing twice into security, which is the same exact damage output as a security attack +1 inheritable. So that's fine and dandy. You're on par with a 1-for-1 type of inheritable. But the second you add like security attack plus to an unsuspend, and red doesn't really have that great of abilities to unsuspend, now its damage output is actually less for the same level of input. That's why like Alphamon and BT9 and Metal Gurumon and Grand Kawagamon, and I could keep listing OTK decks. They all have security attack plus and unsuspend for that reason, is because it's just more efficient to pair those up together rather than double down on just Security Attack Plus. I think literally like one of the only red decks that has Unsuspend is like maybe Gallantmon, but Gallantmon's not very good at using Security Attack Plus or whatever. And then Dorbrick OTK, which is another OTK, which has to use a blue card to unsuspend, so kind of defeats the purpose of like, oh, this is a red thing. Um, so
Plus
yeah,
with the plus with the Galamon too, it's got a prerequisite. It's like you have to like I think this is the one you're referring to is like Galamon X or something. It's
yeah,
like when digivolving or when attacking, you delete something on the field. If you don't delete something, then you can unsuspend.
yeah. So like the trade off with Gallant X is the idea is you're still going to be making the opponent lose a security either way. So whether it's through a second attack, like an extra attack, or the burning of security, it doesn't matter because the game is expecting you to be using Gallantmon to take an extra security either way. One of them is obviously better than the other, especially for how Gallantmon plays. Burning is way more efficient and safer than actually doing the second check. But that's kind of just Red's whole like side gimmick, is trying to make their security checks safe, because they do have cards like a Delicate Plan and Aldemon and stuff and a lot more trash security effects than some of the other colors in the game. But going back to my like point is, purple also can do that too, because purple also has some cards that trash security, like Lucimon and whatnot. But that's also borrowing the mechanics from yellow. So again, it's like purple is good already, but when you start mixing other colors, now purple is becoming absolutely insane. Because it just has the mechanics that every other color has and more. And blue is just blue. It kind of is doing a similar thing, not as good as purple. But the fact that blue just has some of the better mechanics for where the game currently ended up. Because again, going to why red is so bad right now, for the most part, is because red wants to delete things, and deleting things is either bad or hard. So now we have to have alternative ways to be able to get rid of Digimon, which is what makes blue so good, is because bouncing to hand or bottom of the deck isn't triggering on delete effects. So you're already starting to just bypass some protections that Digimon have, on top of the fact that we kind of already alluded to source stripping. Source stripping is one of the best forms of soft removal right now, because it can take away very important abilities to what the opponent's game plan and strategy is. Either that, or it just uses it to further extend what it's already trying to do. So like, it's super important. This is kind of partially why Black War Greymon started falling off, is because his protections came from an inheritable. Blue now comes and says, hey, I'm going to mess with your inheritables. You no longer have your protections, so I completely invalidate you because I splashed in a little bit of source stripping. So that's kind of like why something like War Greymon started falling by the wayside, is because its solution to the meta to protect itself now is getting outed by Blue's native mechanics. And like that, sure, that is the checks and balances, but when a lot of decks kind of just lose to that type of a strategy, really shows overall poor game design in my perspective. Because again, that's why I don't think Galactimon is that great, is because it relies on its inheritables, and now Blue comes along and messes with those and completely disrupts the entire game plan. And it does that for more than just those two decks. I'll save everyone the time and just stop at that. And that's kind of why the third best color in the game, in my perspective, is black. So, as you kind of already mentioned, black is kind of this anti-meta defensive color. And right now, defense is super important. And black has some of the better protections. Even though its removal type isn't that great in terms of like deleting Digimon by play cost, that's actually a little bit more relevant because of Ace Digimon having lower than average play costs, which makes those older abilities actually better, incidentally, just because of the design shifts of the game. But the biggest thing, similar to blue messing with inheritables, black having de-digivolve has actually became the best form of soft removal in the entire game because it's more directly outing specific threats that didn't have answers to before. It's just like, oh, I can't be deleted, I can't be bounced, I can't be put in security, I can't be this, that, that. Like, you can have all of these different forms of protection, but one usually weakness that's always present is the fact that it's not able to not be de-digivolved. So it's just like, okay, you have all your protections, that's great. I'm just going to de-digivolve your Digimon, and then your weak Digimon, sure, I can't get rid of it, but it's not like it's going to be that useful anymore, especially since you already invested as much resource to get up into your main Digimon to begin with your protections. Like, that's why Black kind of tends to creep up on top of its overall defensive gameplay style.
Yeah, plus also like kind of you were saying with like the play cost like kind of counters the aces, but also it's like the digivolve. If you digivolve the ace, like say if you digivolve into a black Digimon that would technically pass over, you digivolve their stack that had the ace on the top or something. That practically made your evolution for free right there. Plus, like really, there's not. I think there's only one card in the entire game that says, "Hey, I cannot be digivolved," and that's the Metal Greymon X Anybody from BT11. I feel like there's a second, but I don't remember if there is or not for sure.
No, I definitely feel like there is at least one other card that stops de-digivolve. But yeah, like, just the fact that it is just becoming more efficient of a soft form removal, like source stripping, because you could also source strip aces that are like low level aces from a level 6 or 7. Like, that's actually super relevant right now. Like, more relevant than it's ever been, because aces are really strong Digimon, and there's some really insanely powerful ones. But that's also kind of why, like, a color like green is struggling, is because black already does almost everything that green would want to do, but better. Because, oh, sure, green has a little bit more redirect effects than black does, but black also has redirect effects and, like, defensive abilities to stop the opponent from dealing damage. Green tries to, like, a lot of Green's, like, core gimmick is, I'm going to suspend a Digimon and then ideally stun lock it so that way I could beat it up later. And Green has never evolved past that, or has rarely evolved past that, to the point where it kind of is detrimental, similar to Red, where the color really hasn't gotten any new tools to be able to evolve and elevate its overall game plan. And that's partially why the whole two color aspect of what green is doing is usually borrowing from black, because they're just trying to make a good defensive color combination and defensive deck styles as a result. But the fact that it needs the mechanics of another color in order to be competitively viable is a problem in of itself. Like, that's why the starter deck Rapidmon is like that insane of a card, because you just, all you need is a green tamer, and then you could just start de-digivolving and gaining protections, and then that lines you up for a lot of good aces, which there's a lot of good aces in the color black. There's some okay aces in green, but black has the majority of good aces because black has the ability to goad, which is something that we don't have a whole lot of, but the ones that we do and how we're utilizing it is what's making aces more powerful than they probably should have been, because we've had goading effects before we had aces. So I don't know if there was just a little bit of design oversight in that, or if that was intentional. They'll never admit, and we'll never know. But that's partially like why certain mechanics and coming out with new mechanics really can elevate a color's overall game plans and strategy. We've seen this with Yellow, where Yellow literally printed memory for free more egregiously than Blue or Purple, and it was honestly like one of the best decks in the entire, like, best decks in best color in the entire game because of that. And then along comes a speed gap, and now Yellow basically falls off the face of the earth because now it can't compete again, because Yellow as a color lacks a lot of the damage, kind of like green, needed in order to actually close out games. And yellow has a harder time subsidizing some other colors to be able to actually elevate its game plan and make up for those losses. So that's why like yellow is primarily seen as a control based color because it just doesn't have the push that a lot of other colors do have. That's why like Dominimon is more focused on swarm and defense and trying to protect yourself, heal your security, and stop the opponent and ace bait and all that other stuff. Versus like, oh, I'm just gonna like punch 3 times with security attack plus and the game is over. Um, so you can kind of see like there's this balance between the offensive colors and the defensive colors where red, blue, and purple are more of the offensive colors, where black, yellow, and green are more of the defensive colors. And I like that there is that balance to them. It's just there's the imbalance of the aggression outpaces the control, or the control is so good that it just makes and ruins um, the overall experience because it could slow things down to such a crawl and such a grind, especially for events that it's like making itself, it's losing to itself essentially, where it's like, okay, we're gonna have 1.5 games and our game one is going to dictate the majority of if this deck is going to be good enough to move on to the next round or not, at least like from a more high competitive level, because Bandai wants games to like be properly timed, and control decks are actually at a disadvantage in Digimon, not only just because they don't generally print memory and make all of their plays for free, but because the rules of the game actually don't support that style of gameplay, and they want you to have a actual win con, which is why like Purple Hybrids is coming along and is actually making control decks somewhat like more viable, like Beelstar, because Beelstar had that same damage output issue where it was just having a hard time, but now that Purple Hybrids can aggress, mill, setup, and control like literally all in one, makes it absolutely absurd. But yeah, so that's kind of like just a quick and dirty rundown on like why certain colors are doing well. And I think like we're going to be getting to a problematic state where we're like, if blue and purple are already this powerful, where do we actually go from here if power creep is inevitable? Like, we're already in several decks ignoring the fundamental resource system of the game, which is there as a balancing point, and for almost every other color but blue and purple, it is a balancing tool because you still have to pay the cost of a lot of your cards. Except for blue and purple, of course, because you just print memory and then you just do everything you want for borderline next to nothing. And I think like that's the big underlying issue is like if you actually look at how much memory gain or cheating on resources the other colors have compared to blue or purple, it's such night and day. It's so night and day that it's like borderline obvious on where a lot of these speed problems are coming from and these tempo problems. So not only can blue and purple perform just as good as every other deck in the entire game and utilize all of their mechanics either through color sharing or just, copycat mechanics like unsuspend versus security attack plus. But now that you're putting it into new context, it just can further elevate what those colors are doing versus all of the other colors in the game. So that's why like figuring out new and interesting mechanics is good, but there needs to be like a proper allocation to where they put some of those mechanics. At least that's just my perspective. I don't know if you have any other difference in perspective, Jay Stewart.
No, and I think it's fair to say because I mean, I could give a really good example of like just showing the difference that these blue and the purple decks have. Decks like the Dex Daruga deck and everything, because it got introduced like all the support and everything for it got out in BT16 if I remember correctly. And I was trying to play the black base version of it, but I was running into inconsistencies. I was missing my uh, what's the main guy's name? The SLC leader. I can't think.
Kosuke?
Uh, Kosuke, thank you. Yeah, like I wasn't getting Kosuke consistently like I should have to get my protections. I was constantly getting behind because I wasn't obviously I had the training cards and everything, but my Evo still costed a lot, and I didn't have ways to gain memory as powerful as literally people were doing with the purple base when they just threw in Lugamon instead, and it made it so much better.
Yeah, like free Evo into level 4 into free Evo, or like cost of 1 Evo into level 5 into cost of like 1 Evo into level 6 is like insanely absurd that only purple and blue can realistically do. Like going back to your Dex example, I do have the statistics on which color variant was winning more. It almost was split. So as of EX7, um, with the 9 total Dex decks that were played, 4 of them were black based and 5 of them were purple based. So that kind of numbers show that purple was the more consistent end of the spectrum. Like black was doing good because again, the protections that it was playing around with just made it very difficult for your Digimon to actually be removed. And then again, de-digivolve and deleting tamers are all really huge and powerful mechanics that can be found in both purple and black. But that goes to show like okay, I don't care if I see my lines more consistently, it doesn't matter what end of the spectrum I'm using, I'm usually going to have a better output. And black has those, it's just not as high as what purple can do. Like, I kind of already said this in one of my deck profiles when I was covering decks, where it's just like, purple is where your aggression is, black is where your control is. If you want to play the deck in a more control heavy manner, you play black. If you want to, like a black base, if you want to play the deck in a more aggressive manner, you play purple. And purple definitely came out on top compared to black when it came to what base was the more used base. So sorry to
But
like
yeah,
steal your thunder on that.
oh no, you're fine because you have the data, you collect this stuff and everything, so you're able to snap at that like at the winds of a finger. But uh, because the only other time we saw like a deck that was starting to catch up to them was yellow, and yellow for a long time hadn't been good since EX or not EX, sorry, was BT7 with the yellow hybrid stuff. But once the Jet Selfie got hit, we didn't see yellow for a long time until the Patamon engine came out, and that was literally the fastest way to print memory in the entire game because all you had to do was turn one, play Patamon or Evo into Patamon and play TK. That was it, and you just didn't care what your opponent set you at because you could just go back to three instantly on top of getting a free Evo.
Yeah, so essentially you get like literally 2 free Evos because Patamon Evos for free from security, and then all of the memory refunding or gaining in that aspect because Patamon was a free Evo, which triggered his own inheritable ability and TK's, allowed you to Evo into cleanly a level 5 Digimon. That's not including like any setup training cards or whatever, because that again allows you to accelerate even more. Same thing with like Emissary of Hope, again, just more acceleration, trying to pay as little as possible for a high of output as possible, which is why like Magnamon in yellow was that big of a problem, was because it just was egregiously cheating on the memory more than any other deck at that time, making it a very hard to deal with body because of the mechanics that black, blue, and yellow as a color combination was allowing Magnamon to use, and therefore allowing yellow to have access to. But yeah, and then like BT15 came out the Gatomon, so now you could literally do like you had similar lines of play to gain even more memory, because when you evoed Patamon and a Gatomon, Gatomon gains you a memory, Patamon gains you a memory, then TK gains you a memory, and now you're actually one more memory up than you were before. But again, that's why TK got hit, is to try to limit that a little bit more.
Yeah, because it just like because having the Patamon and then playing the TK just guaranteed you had your setup. Because at least the Patamon feels a little bit more fair. That it's just kind of a roll of the dice kind of thing instead of like rolling like random dice that could just be anything. You're now just rolling that dice that guarantee you seven every single time.
Yeah,
As an
like
example.
the kind of like what we're getting to is like not only are certain mechanics, especially for the way the game is evolving, better than others, it's just the combination of those mechanics that is further creating more stress and strain on the design of the game as a whole. Obviously, looking at their ban and restriction list, just pulling that up as a fun little example. I already know that the majority of the reasons why cards got hit was because of speed. It literally is a speed issue. Like, oh, we had to ban this card because the deck was moving too fast. We had to ban this card because it was performing better than expected, because the deck was moving too fast. So, like, just going over things pretty quickly. Ukomon, it's a white Digimon. Uh, it started to invalidate Digimon Emperor. They really didn't like it. Plus, the extra memory allows decks to go too fast. Louis, moving out of Digimon from Raising, especially in combination with Ukomon, further invalidates Digimon Emperor, and then it made the deck move too fast because, again, gaining memory is, like, broken. Hammerspark, gain memory in blue. Deck made blue decks move too fast. Awakening of the Golden Knight allowed you to cheese on your evolution. Again, made the deck move too fast. Numemon X didn't make the deck move too fast. It was just a high resilience body. So that's like more of a special case, but I already mentioned TK. Yellow card, gain memory, easy setup, made decks move too fast, especially in the later stages of the game where you just gain an egregious amount of memory for like no reason, and then you could just outpace the opponent because of how much memory you're gaining. So you could already start to see, like, just from the latest bans and restrictions, a lot of these reasons were too fast. Like, you could just read on the ban and restriction list, like Gabumon made decks move too fast. Garurumon X, or Gabumon X and Garurumon X, easy setup, made decks move too fast. Nubismon, just too strong of an output because decks were too fast. Like, that is the majority of the reasons why, and a lot of the colors that are on this ban and restriction list are in blue and in purple. You do have a little bit of red because red had that punch, and you have a tiny bit of green because back in the early stages, again, Digisorption for a net cost of 0 to evolve into a level 5 just, again, made decks move too fast. That's the moral of the story, is like certain colors have mechanics that let decks move too quickly. That's why Greymon X Antibody was banned. That's like, I could keep listing cards off of this ban and restriction list. That's why Jet Sylphie was limited, is because it was too quick to go into a level 5 for very cheap, and then that let you go into any level 6. It was, yeah, like Mega Digimon Fusion was banned literally because it made going into a level 7 like borderline free. And level 7s at that stage of the game, when this card was around, were insane because they usually meant the game was ending. So, yeah. There's not a whole lot of like bans and restrictions that weren't speed issues. Like, there's a couple of resilient issues, a couple of damage output issues, and then like, oh, this just created unfun play patterns in the case of Ice Wall. So, like, you could see this very clear pattern that certain colors just have access at better memory management than others, and that memory management matters way more since the game has only been getting more and more high powered. Cause like,
Yeah, because I know.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say because I know some other cards are on that ban list too because they didn't want to deal with having to constantly worry about whenever they print cards to go, oh, is this going to make this card even more broken? Like, for the example of Mega Digimon Fusion. If that card literally was still around, literally every level 7 would have to be extremely powered down compared to what they are now and everything. Because
Yeah,
I even think EX or BT7 is like when we really saw Mega Digimon Fusion in JP was like really broken because blue decks and yellow decks were able to use Suzanumon so consistent, so fast, so often, not having to worry about pass over the memory and just do a lot of checks stupid fast kind of situation.
Right. And like for where the game currently is, being proactive is infinitely better than being reactive. So we could see like a lot of the memory and like speed issues is because certain proactive levels of play are are accelerating things more than the reactive ones. So like just as an example, I you can see that there's a lot of rookie inheritables that can gain you a memory. Like, do X to gain a memory. The ones that are actually being played are the ones where you're triggering them yourself. So, like Guilmon from the starter deck, I love that card a lot. I think that card is a fantastic card. But the fact that the memory gain is when you're deleting the opponent's Digimon on your turn is why that card is unplayable right now, is because one, you're not deleting Digimon, and two, if you're deleting Digimon, half the time it's not on your turn because of ace Digimon or blockers or whatever. So like you're missing the windows of opportunity in which to gain that memory to gain that tempo, and the opponent's not just going to sit there and give it to you. That's why the Gabumon, like the Gabumon promo from way back in the day, like when you remove a source from the opponent's Digimon, gain a memory, that usually wasn't super great. It was back then just because Digimon actually sat on the field, but now that Digimon aren't exactly sitting on the field because they don't have to, that ability is now no longer triggering. Whereas you look at Gabumon from BT14, discard a card, gain a memory. Well, I just pair it up with a when Digivolve, draw and discard. Now that's essentially refunding me on my evolution, making my evolution that much cheaper. So you can see, like, just from that level of example on where some of these issues are starting to arise when it comes to certain speed, when it comes to certain speed gaps. And you could even tell from all of the zero cost options, like, because each color got a zero cost option to gain a memory. Some of them are laughably bad, and some of them are, like, actually pretty broken. Blue obviously got theirs limited, and I wouldn't be surprised if purple gets theirs limited next, because theirs is almost the exact same thing, except in the late stages of the game, it actually has the ability to gain you more than just that one memory. Yes, it's based on your trash, but because of how the game currently accelerated in its power creep, it made a card like that even stronger, because by turn one or two, or like by your second turn, you could very easily have 10 cards in your trash. Very easily, depending on your deck. And even if it's not on turn 2, you could wait a whole extra turn 3, when you're actually trying to make your plays, and then boom, now that card is just as good as a Hammer Spark. Or if the opponent attacked in your security, they're feeding your trash, and now that card has the potential to be even better than Hammer Spark. So it's like, you can see there's certain elements to the game that just make certain they just favor certain colors. Like I hate to like play the favoritism game, but they just favoritism certain colors and the mechanics that they get because of how much more richer those mechanics are. Because, like, again, increased protection means deletion is now bad. So 3 colors, black, purple, and red, those are the 3 colors that interact with deleting Digimon more specifically as a removal type. Well, purple doesn't need to remove because they have alternative things to do, and their removal is most of the time free. Black can de-digivolve, so they could just get around it just by de-digivolving. Red doesn't have anything. Like, red literally doesn't have anything that can answer that type of a question. So, like, it's a really weird level of checks and balances that's more in the favor of the aggressors most of the time. Unless the protections are that high, where removal is just rendered irrelevant, and then that creates another separate issue. But most of those are, like, black mechanics most of the time, the high levels of protection. It's like black and green for whatever reason. Well, it's because those are defensive colors. But yeah, so
Yeah, because
go
I
ahead.
will say, because the other removal that red did technically have is raid, but the problem is you have to declare an attack and swing at someone unsuspended. And with aces now, literally every color has aces, and most of the time the aces are really good. whether it's DP minus, Digi ball, delete something, bounce something, strip something. They have all types of wide effects that just make them really good. So therefore, invalidating what Raid does.
Yeah, because we kind of saw this like disappearance of like aggressive level fives because you don't want to swing on a level five because a level six ace will out your level five almost 100% of the time. Almost 100%. So it's like just from like you could it's not like the existence of aces now makes this type of gameplay bad. That's not exactly 100% true. It's just the mechanics in which the aces are being played in. And it's really interesting that the majority of the aces, like the really good aces, are in yellow, black, and it's mostly just yellow and black. Purple doesn't really have that many. Blue doesn't have that many. Um,
I think blue has some, but I think
Blue
they're
has
more
some.
archetype focused.
Yeah, but like yellow and black having some of the stronger aces of the game really just makes it so attacking is just harder in general, which means again, speed is king, and that's why decks want to try to move as quickly as possible so they don't have to run into the situations where an ace Digimon could spell absolutely disaster for them. So they're trying to outspeed the opponent in getting into a big boss monster before they can set up an ace bait. So, like, because of the way that blue and purple are moving, it's putting more stress on the game as a whole. And that's partially the reason why almost every other color is borderline phased out. Because if they can't compete with the speed and aggression of those, they better have a really good defensive game plan, which most decks don't, because if their defensive game plan is too high, then they don't actually have a win condition anymore, other than I hope my opponent just loses because they can't win. And that's not necessarily the best mentality to be in, which now puts further strain and emphasis on the earlier stages of the game, which purple and blue having high levels of speed and consistency is partially why they're going to be accelerated more than every other color in the entire game. And as we are seeing right now, rogue decks are basically disappearing because everything that's not those two colors, that's actually good and viable, is borderline on almost unplayable. Like that's why we see a slew of decks that are having a very hard time compete. Like we just had the Liberator stuff, all irrelevant, every single one of it. And even like some of the new stuff that's coming out from the Japanese spoilers, literally almost all of it is irrelevant because it's not going to be better than what we currently have. And that at the like once players start catching on, they won't need to buy any new sets. Like, oh, I played Mirage, like just as an example. If I was a smart player and I invested in Mirage from BT11, I literally, outside of upgrades, didn't even have to buy into anything else. I could have literally been playing Mirage for a year and a half, almost 2 years. No, it would be 2 years at this point. And I didn't really need to invest into much of anything. Like I would have EX4 and EX4, EX5 and BT13, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, basically.
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah, so like literally
Like
outside
maybe
of
one or two promos, honestly,
right.
probably.
Yeah, a couple of promos here or there, like more boosts, trainings and whatnot. Like just generic accelerants. And yeah, like that ultimately can end up hurting the sales of the game. And we've already seen what happened when Bandai screws up when it comes to overall set design and stores lose confidence in the game. It really puts a huge strain on where the game currently is. Especially when they do power creep a set and that set's actually insanely relevant. Looking at you, BT16, EX6, BT17, they had pretty poor allocation numbers, but that wasn't necessarily because of the gameplay perspective. But that is something that Bandai does kind of have to think about, which is why sometimes when they go and ban and limit cards, they use the wording, it was too good for too long, because that is what's restricting the ability to want to create more, especially something that could help support it. It's like, oh, how can we realistically support Mirage when Mirage doesn't need it? Or like, how can we make something that's similar that can compete with him when it can't compete with him? So,
Yeah. Plus, I think the other problem is too with what we have been seeing with the newer sets and everything. Like you said, with the EX7, the EX8, if you pay attention to those, is and I think I've been saying this before, and I'll say it again. They play way too fair. It's the gameplay that Liberators like the whole theme is. It's more back and forth kind of focus. But the problem is we have too many decks that are kind of one decided that could just turn one or even turn two just present this big problem that the other decks can't out because they're too fair, so to say. And like I try to play like the Vortex deck and everything too, and it's just like I try to throw in what I could to make it unfair, so to say. I threw in the training cards, I threw in hidden potential just because it's a stupid good card, and it still didn't help the deck when there's so many other cards that make the rest of the deck more unfair, so to say.
right, because, like, just as an example, when you get a play like what Mirage can do, not to, like, keep harping and picking on Mirage, because there's a lot of other decks that can abuse the memory system. But when you get a deck like Mirage, where you move your rookie out of raising, Digivolve into a level 4. That level 4 gains you a memory. The inheritable from the level 3 gains you a memory. And you used a training card to Digivolve for free. Now you just gained 2 memory for Digivolving for free. So that allows you to do more with your memory. You look at a deck like the Vortex deck. They don't have a play that's equivalent to that. They don't. Most decks don't have a play that's equivalent to that. The most equivalent play is what Purple is doing, where you're triggering the inheritable after digivolving for free, and that's allowing you to then use your memory more efficiently. Like that's the unfortunately the name of the game is speed and memory efficiency, and most decks aren't to the level of memory efficiency that blue or purple have. Because like going back to the zero cost option example, you look at green zero cost option. You need to kill a Digimon. Like, you put a debuff on the opponent's Digimon and you need to kill it in order to gain memory. The one that they did have before that was overtly broken, which did end up getting limited, but their new one, you need to kill a Digimon. Blacks, you also need to kill a Digimon. This time you need to kill one of your Digimon. That's how you gain 2 memory. Then you look at reds. It gains 2 memory instantly, but it has to give it back. There's an inherent downside to it. Yellows is a little bit less balanced because you just lose the security, which sometimes that's what yellow wants to do anyway, to gain 2 memory. But both of those that gain you 2 memory don't have any security abilities. So they're just dead cards in security as like another balancing point. So like you could see that the like every other zero cost option except for blue and purples are like actually underpowered compared to what blue and purples was doing. Again, outside of hidden potential discovered for green. But like that's just
Yeah,
from a fundamental level, you could see that there is just this fundamental imbalance in the colors and what they're able to do because everything is just too fair. Like go ahead, look at any database. I'm challenging you. Look at any database. Look at where decks are gaining memory and how they're gaining memory, and you'll see most of them are not proactive. They're reactive. So
yeah, because I know like so Bagamon's only real way to gain memory is like the inheritables of when you delete something like in the battle and everything, which can happen at times, but at the same time, there's so many things that I could prevent myself from being deleted. I'll just counter ace on top of something else, which I've had happen multiple times before, which is when I was playing it, and it's like, oh well, I really don't have an answer to you acing me right now kind of situation. It's like the whole ray thing I was saying, and even like the whole gravity crushing blinding ray, like it's not as good as the hammer spark or the jax ray is, so to say, but they are still really powerful in their own because even just gaining those in your hand, like because you really just only need to see at least 1 or 2 of those, and you just save it for whenever you need to do a big push for the game, which is what we see hybrid do a lot of the time. They're not going to just play it when they know they're not going to win the game. Because at no point, because why would you play something like you're not going to care if your opponent gains 3 memory when you're literally winning for game right then and there, so to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And even like the blinding ray is like blinding ray. I would still argue is like a really good thing to have for the Magnum X, for example, because you're removing your own security, therefore prompting his effect to go off, and therefore you don't need to worry about your opponent having an answer in their security, so to say, for example. Which is
Yeah.
why even we're seeing what was that the Gatomon egg from BT15? I can't think what it is.
Nyaramon?
Like that's what makes Nyaromon, which makes that egg really, and I mean really stupid good and broken for the Magnamon X, because its effect triggers when attacking, trash a card from your security to gain a memory, which then causes you to unsuspend your guy, get your protection, and therefore you don't lose a security check now.
Yeah. Like, I think that they could definitely do a better job at balancing their colors. Like, honestly, I still feel like we're just one ban and restriction list away from the game actually being really good. Because if you like, so there's a psychological thing to buffs and nerfs. More people are more positive, like positively receptive to buffs, but TCGs work in the opposite way where like things actually need to be nerfed more than they need to be buffed. Like, because where the game currently is with blue and purple, like, you're basically both those colors are basically playing Yu-Gi-Oh! You're ignoring the resource system of the game, taking 10, 15-minute turns, doing long, intricate actions with lots of triggers triggering. And that's partially where some of the time is getting eaten up. And why control decks are also put at a disadvantage is because they're not doing as much, but that's the whole point. But that's where, like, the aggressive players, because they're doing that much more, they can take advantage of that disadvantage in a sense and play towards the clock. But regardless of clock play, like the fact that they're just egregiously cheating on the memory system more than every other color is why they're overperforming as a whole. And it's not like there's that many cards that they're utilizing to accomplish this. It's just a small handful. So it's not like this is not irreversible. And the problem is if we try to put everything else up to their power level, then again, you're just asking for the mechanics to speak louder than the actual like one, twos, and threes. So it's just like, okay, if everything can evo into a level 6 for essentially a net 1 memory, it's up to the level 6s to then decide which level 6 is actually the better one and the stronger one. And that's what'll define what the meta actually is. And sadly, it's still in blue and purple's favor, even in those situations. Because purple will just end up using some other colors level 6s because of just, two color cards basically invalidating the color system of the game, which was one of my initial fears, but it's not that bad. I get where they're coming from, where it's like, okay, we have the two colors. We're going to design a card around the fact that they do have two colors, which usually comes with a higher Digivolution cost. And it's actually using both, like, two mechanics from both of the colors, where it's like, okay, recover one and delete a Digimon, just as a base example. Like, it's trying to actually play towards both of the colors' strengths overall, while enhancing what the deck is capable of. So I'm not saying like two color cards are a problem. I'm just pointing out that like the imbalance in where some of the two color cards are coming from and the colors that are actually being able to use two color cards is making that singular color better as a whole. That's kind of where purple is, and arguably yellow as well. But yeah, so I think that they definitely need to reevaluate what they're trying to do for not necessarily each color. I think each color is defined relatively well. It's just they need to reevaluate where the power of those mechanics are doing, because I think they went a little too heavy on some of them.
Yeah, like I know you said it too. It's like one good ban list. Like if literally they could, I don't know, like take for example, hit the server's engine because of how broken it is. And like I know some people have been talking about the how the Galactic deck is just like becoming a really stupid abuse right now too. It's
Yeah,
like, well, you can
the
kill two
Galaxy
birds.
engine.
Yeah, like you can kind of hit two birds with one stone if you hit the uh, what's that level for? The blue one, Gargamon, I think, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Like
Gargamon.
technically, you hit two
Not
birds
well.
with one
It's
stone with that
Gaugamon.
one.
Yeah, it's Gaugamon. The
Galgamon, my
BT16
apologies.
one more specifically.
Yeah, just by hitting that, you hit two birds, one stone. So to say, I mean, I don't know if Mirage would need another hit at that point, but
No, he definitely
I
does.
mean,
He definitely
yeah,
does.
like
It'll
I
hurt,
think
but
almost yeah,
yeah,
because it's almost like as if the level six, because the level six is just that stupid good of a generic card that literally avoid like your opponent can't do any kind of shenanigan of literally getting any card added to hand, whether you play a searcher because you need to play a searcher, training cards, memory boost, drawing a card for your effects because you need to get that card to try to find that out. Like literally shuts that entire mechanic of the game that you need
yeah,
down unless you want to get punished for it.
yeah. But
Like
like
just as some examples.
yeah, those are just some examples on like where the speed acceleration is coming from, and I'm not saying to like a lot of people are worried. Oh, when you start banning like some of the top cards and some of the top decks, like oh, what's gonna fill that power vacuum? Honestly, I think like depending on what they would hit, because not to try to get into a ban and restriction like thing, because that literally can be a whole separate episode. But like just to
Mm-hmm.
touch on it, a lot of people are concerned on what the power vacuum would be. But if the power vacuum, like if what was limited slows the game down, then more things are going to be racing towards that power vacuum, as we saw with BT15, and then things should generally balance themselves out better. Just because you took the speed away, now everything's on a more similar speed plane, and that's again what's going to allow the individual decks and cards to shine brighter than the package or engine that they're going to be played with. So, and it's very obvious that certain colors do have better packages and engines than others. And some of them are like waiting to be broken. I'll say like green is literally just waiting to be broken because Patamon's pretty good as a card, and because almost everything in green suspends itself, like suspends something. Like that's just something waiting to be broken. But because it's a reactive play, not a proactive play, that's why it's not currently overtly broken. Um, but yeah, so I kind of hope this helps understand like where mechanical identities and colors kind of do matter a lot, especially with where the game currently is. I'm not necessarily saying this as like a super negative or a positive thing. It's just trying to be more on a neutral tone, because I do think Digimon does have a good amount of mechanical depth. I like the flavor that they're including in the mechanics. I like the fact that the two color cards are utilizing mechanics from both colors to further elaborate and enhance on what its weakness is. They do have some really good checks and balances to a lot of their cards. It's just there's a couple of bad eggs that are spoiling the bunch, so to speak, or bad apples that are spoiling the bunch.
Yeah, because like a lot of times that a lot of those two color cards, they're not even using like the most broken part of their color, so to say. They're using like the semi second best or the third best, but in combination with the other colors, second or third best, is what makes it good.
Yeah. So I hope you. I think this is a good place to stop. So I hope everyone kind of like finds this type of like discussion to be interesting. And I want to thank everyone for staying all the way to the end. It really does mean a lot. Um, any final thoughts or words, Jay Stewart?
Yeah, so the holiday time is coming up, and of course, with that, we also have the special, what is it, gift box or kind of thing where we're getting a bunch of other promo cards. So keep an eye out, start saving up money for that kind of stuff, because there some decks will get powered up from that alone.
Yeah, that's gonna be like the LM December thing. That's gonna be retail around 40 to $50, pending what you where you are and who your seller is. But that's like their average range in which the price is gonna be. Those are definitely gonna be good. It's gonna shake up the format a little bit. I do agree with that. And then I know there's also going to be a winter event coming up soon as well. I think that's supposed to be Singleton, so that'll be interesting to see. Don't necessarily think Digimon, as of right now, is very receptive to alternate formats. Again, I could do a whole separate video on that in and of itself. Um, but it'll be interesting just to be able to not play this current slog of a meta that we're finding ourselves in. And my only hope is still just waiting for Bandai to make the game better. Whether that's a ban and restriction list or something interesting that's coming out that's actually going to shake the entire foundation of the meta, not necessarily maybe on Magnamon X's level, because that was kind of stupid, but something that actually is going to benefit the game more than just power creep it into oblivion and turn it into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's something I don't exactly want to see. But that's all we have for this episode. And if you enjoyed what you listened to, make sure to leave that follow and subscribe or whatever, depending on the platform that you're listening on. And we all hope to see you in the next episode. Later.